This 4-year-old beggar girl is left starving for 2 days, but a millionaire saw everything and did something that shocked everyone. Watch until the end. You won't regret it. Comment on what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The scorching sun of Phoenix beat down on the asphalt as Theodore Teddy Blackwood adjusted his glasses at his office desk, watching the street from his window. At 58, the businessman maintained the same meticulous routine. Coffee at 7, reports until 9, meetings until noon. His nut processing company had thrived for 2 decades, a reflection of his controlling, perfectionist personality that missed no detail. But at that moment, something disturbed his concentration. A small figure moved amongst the trash cans across the street. Teddy frowned, adjusting his glasses. It was a child, a girl, no more than 4, scrawny, with tangled hair, scavenging through the refuse people threw away. "That's absurd," he muttered, turning back to the papers on his desk. The city had its problems, but seeing a child in that situation bothered him oddly. He tried to resume analyzing the contracts, but his eyes kept drifting back to the window. The girl was there again. It was the 2nd day he'd watched her in the same desperate activity. She carefully opened each bag, as if she knew exactly what she sought. When she found something that looked edible, she quickly stashed it in a torn plastic bag. Teddy rose from his chair, restless. His wife, Eleanor, always criticized him for being too distant, for not getting involved with issues not strictly business-related. But here was a child, alone, clearly abandoned right in front of his company. How could he simply ignore it? He descended the stairs of the commercial building and crossed the street. The girl saw him approaching and shrank back, clutching the bag to her chest. Her large, dark eyes watched him with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Hi, little one," Teddy said, crouching to her level. "What's your name?" "Juniper," she replied in a small voice, almost a whisper. "Juniper. That's a pretty name. And where are your folks?" The girl lowered her eyes, nervously fidgeting with the bag. "Mama Serenity vanished. She hasn't come back for 2 days." Teddy felt his stomach tighten. Serenity. The name wasn't familiar, but the situation was clear. The child was abandoned. Vanished how? "She went out at night like she always does for work, but she didn't come back. I waited and waited, but she didn't." Juniper's words had a disturbing clarity for such a small child. Teddy noticed how precisely she spoke, choosing her words carefully, as if she had a very sharp memory for details. "Work where?" "She cleans office buildings at night. Mama Serenity always says the buildings are quieter when everyone's gone home. She knows all the nooks and crannies, every smell in each place." Teddy was intrigued by how Juniper described Serenity's activities. There was something too specific in those words, as if the child had heard these explanations many times. "Don't you have anyone else? Grandparents, aunts, uncles?" Juniper shook her head. "Just Mama Serenity. She tells me stories from when she was little, when she still had a real house, but now we just have the shack in the alley." Teddy looked in the direction the girl pointed. At the end of the street, between 2 abandoned buildings, was a rickety structure of wood and tarp. The place was known in the city as a spot where homeless people temporarily sheltered. "Are you hungry?" Juniper's eyes lit up, but she hesitated before answering. "Mama Serenity says we can't take food from strangers, but I'm really hungry." The child's hesitation revealed the conflict between the education she'd received and the basic need for survival. Teddy found himself facing a situation far outside his comfort zone. His life was spreadsheets, contracts, and meetings. Social problems were someone else's responsibility. But here was Juniper, a real child with real hunger, looking at him with real hope. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. "Let's get you something to eat." Juniper took his hand carefully, as if testing if the gesture was safe. Teddy led her to a nearby bakery, where he bought bread, milk, and fruit. He watched as she ate voraciously, but politely, thanking him with each bite. "Juniper, do you remember things people say?" he asked, curious about the intelligence he sensed in the child. "I remember everything," she said, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "Mama Serenity is amazed. She says I have an elephant's memory. I remember conversations, numbers, she says, people's names." "What kind of conversations?" "She talks to herself sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep. She talks about buildings, papers she finds, things she doesn't quite understand. Mama Serenity gets worried about things she sees when she works." Teddy felt a chill. There was something in Juniper's words that bothered him, a sense that the child knew more than she should, and Serenity's sudden absence started to take on more sinister contours in his mind. "Juniper, can you show me where you live? I want to see if Serenity's back." They walked to the shack. It was even worse than Teddy had imagined. 4 walls of old wood, a leaky tarp roof, a dirt floor. Inside, just a few rags that served as a bed, a dented pot, and some scattered personal belongings. "She hasn't come back," Juniper said with a heartbreaking sadness. Teddy looked around and made a decision that would change his life forever. He couldn't leave that child alone in that place. "Juniper, how about coming to my house today, just until someone shows up to take care of you properly?" The girl looked at him with wide eyes. "Really? Really? But first, we need to talk to my wife." Teddy had no idea how Eleanor would react to the situation. His 54-year-old wife had always been careful about appearances and social reputation. Arriving home with a street child would be at the very least a shock. But looking at Juniper, he felt he had no choice. Something about that girl touched him in a way he couldn't explain, awakening a protective instinct he didn't know he possessed. Teddy's house was in an upscale neighborhood of Phoenix, with a manicured lawn and an electronic gate. Juniper held his hand tightly as they walked through the entrance, her small eyes absorbing every detail of the imposing building. When they reached the door, Teddy took a deep breath. He'd known Eleanor for 32 years of marriage and knew exactly how she would react. "Eleanor!" he called, entering the living room with Juniper by his side. His wife appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. When she saw the child, she stopped immediately, her eyes widening in surprise and then narrowing in disapproval. "Teddy, what's going on here?" Eleanor asked, her voice controlled but clearly irritated. "Who is this girl?" "Her name is Juniper. She was alone on the street, abandoned for 2 days. The person who cared for her has vanished." Eleanor crossed, her arms assuming the posture Teddy knew well when she was about to set strict limits. "And what does that have to do with us? There are appropriate places for these situations. I can't just ignore a child in danger," Teddy replied, feeling strange for defending his decision. Normally, Eleanor made the decisions about domestic matters. "Hi, Mom," Juniper said softly with a politeness that surprised Eleanor. "Thank you for letting me into your pretty house." Eleanor looked at the child, clearly torn between her maternal instinct and her concern about the complications the situation could bring. "Teddy, we need to talk. Now." They headed to the kitchen, leaving Juniper in the living room. The girl sat carefully on the edge of the sofa, observing everything around her attentively, but without touching anything. "Have you lost your mind?" Eleanor whispered. "We can't just bring a street child into our house. What will the neighbors think? What if she has diseases? What if her family comes looking? What if—" "Eleanor, she's 4 years old and was eating trash," Teddy interrupted. "At least for tonight she'll be safe here. This is one night. Teddy, you know how these things work. One night turns into a week turns into a month. Before we know it, we'll be involved in a complicated legal situation." Teddy knew Eleanor was right in her practical concerns, but something in him had changed since he saw Juniper alone on the street. "So what do you suggest?" That I take her back to that shack? Eleanor sighed deeply, massaging her temples. First thing tomorrow, you contact the authorities. She can stay tonight, but only tonight. When they returned to the living room, they found Juniper exactly as they had left her, sitting on the edge of the sofa, but now with her eyes closed, whispering something softly. "What are you doing, honey?" Teddy asked. "I'm sorry, Mr. Teddy. I had a nightmare and came to get some water, but I saw this drawer, and it reminded me of one Mama Serenity fiddled with at the office. She always said drawers tell stories." Teddy helped Juniper up, but was intrigued. The drawer she was fiddling with contained old financial documents that he kept at home. "Juniper, did your Mama Serenity fiddle with drawers in the offices where she worked?" "Only when she was alone in the middle of the night. She didn't take anything, just looked. She said she was trying to understand why some numbers didn't make sense." As he led Juniper back to the guest room, Teddy wondered what kind of numbers Serenity had found, and what exactly she had discovered that made her disappear so abruptly. In the bedroom, Eleanor was already lying down, but clearly awake. "Teddy, this story doesn't smell right to me. The child says things that are too specific for someone of 4 years old. I know. And there's something else." Teddy told her about the connection between Serenity and his company. Eleanor sat up in bed, alarmed. "You think she discovered something irregular in your company?" "I have no idea, but I intend to find out. Tomorrow I'm going to check the records of outsourced employees for the last few months." "What if it's something serious? What if Serenity is involved in something dangerous?" Teddy didn't answer, but they both knew they had crossed a line. Juniper was no longer just an abandoned child who needed temporary help. She was potentially the key to a mystery that could directly affect their lives. In the early morning, Teddy was awakened by noises coming from the kitchen. He went down silently and found Juniper sitting on the floor, rummaging in a drawer. "What are you doing, honey?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Teddy. I had a nightmare and came to get some water. But I saw this drawer, and it reminded me of one Mama Serenity fiddled with at the office. She always said drawers tell stories." Teddy helped Juniper to her feet, but was intrigued. The drawer she had been rummaging through contained old financial documents he kept at home. "Juniper, did your Mama Serenity rummage in drawers in the offices where she worked?" "Only when she was alone in the middle of the night. She didn't take anything, just looked. She said she was trying to understand why some numbers didn't make sense." As he led Juniper back to the guest room, Teddy wondered what kind of numbers Serenity had found and what exactly she had discovered that made her disappear so abruptly. The next morning, Teddy arrived at the company 2 hours earlier than usual. His mind hadn't been able to rest after the conversation with Juniper about Serenity fiddling with office drawers. He needed to understand what was happening before. The situation spun completely out of control. The Blackwood Nuts building was silent when he opened the office door. He went straight to the file where he kept the cleaning service contracts. After 40 minutes of searching, he found what he was looking for, a contract with a company called Sparkling Clean, dated 8 months ago. Among the names of the outsourced employees, there it was, Serenity Santos. Teddy sat heavily in his chair. Serenity had worked at his company for 8 months, cleaning the offices in the early hours, and he'd never known of her existence. This bothered him deeply, revealing how disconnected he was from the basic operation of his own business. He decided to examine the financial records of the last few months in greater detail. As he always did, he meticulously organized each document, each spreadsheet, each report. But this time, he was specifically looking for anomalies, for the numbers that didn't add up that Juniper had mentioned. At 9 in the morning, his partner and accountant, Earl Manning, arrived at the office. At 49, Earl had been responsible for the entire financial side of the company for 15 years. Teddy had always trusted his work blindly, preferring to focus on production and sales. "Early bird today," Earl commented, visibly surprised to find Teddy already working. I'm reviewing some contracts, Teddy replied, carefully observing his partner's reaction. Earl, are you familiar with the employees of the cleaning company? I know the supervisor, Gladys. Why do you ask? Just curious. I never paid attention to who cleans the place. Earl laughed. That's normal. They work after we leave. It's rare to run into them. Teddy nodded, but continued to observe Earl discreetly. There was something in his body language that bothered him, a subtle tension he'd never noticed before. During the morning, while Earl worked at his desk, Teddy took the opportunity to examine the financial records more carefully. He started with the contracts with suppliers for the last 6 months. His meticulous and controlling personality, which many considered excessive, now proved useful. That's when he found the first irregularity. There were regular payments to a company called San Francisco Distributors in the amount of $15,000 per month for the last 4 months. The problem was that Teddy had never heard of this company and certainly hadn't authorized purchases of that amount. Discreetly, he continued investigating. He found 3 more companies with similar names: Santa Rita Commerce, St. Joseph Wholesale, and Our Lady Suppliers, all receiving substantial payments, all unknown to him. The total amount came to almost $200,000 in 6 months. Teddy felt his blood boil. Someone was siphoning money from his company using shell corporations, and by the pattern of the payments, it was someone with direct access to the financial system, someone like Earl. "Earl," he called, trying to keep his voice casual. "Can you explain these companies to me?" He showed him the list he had compiled. Earl approached, looked at the papers, and for a fraction of a second, Teddy saw panic in his eyes. But the accountant quickly recomposed himself. "Oh, those are new suppliers. I got better prices than the previous ones. I thought I'd informed you." "I don't remember that conversation," Teddy said, keeping his tone neutral, but observing each of Earl's reactions. "It must have been by email. You know how rushed things are." Teddy nodded, but his suspicion was confirmed. Earl was lying, and badly. His business experience told him he was facing systematic fraud. At that moment, his phone rang. It was Eleanor. "Teddy, you need to come home, now." "What happened?" "It's about the girl, and about some people who came asking questions." Teddy's heart raced. What kind of people? Social workers. Someone made an anonymous complaint saying we're keeping a child illegally in our home. Teddy looked at Earl, who pretended to be focused on his documents but was clearly listening to the phone conversation. "I'm coming home, Teddy. They said they'll be back tomorrow with an order to take the child. You need to resolve this today." Hanging up the phone, Teddy found himself facing a situation spinning completely out of control. On the one hand, he had discovered a fraud in his company. On the other, he was risking losing Juniper to the social services system. "I need to leave," he said to Earl. "Family problem." "All right, anything? Call me." Teddy left the office with his mind racing. In the car, he tried to organize his thoughts. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Serenity had discovered Earl's frauds during her night work. That's why she'd been nervous in the last week. That's why she had disappeared. But who had made the anonymous complaint about Juniper? And how did they know she was in his house? Arriving home, he found Eleanor visibly nervous, pacing back and forth in the living room. Juniper was sitting on the sofa, but this time not with the careful posture of the previous day. She was curled up, hugging a pillow. "What exactly happened?" Teddy asked. "2 social workers came here at 10 o'clock, Eleanor explained. "They said they received an anonymous complaint that we're keeping a child without legal authorization. They asked several questions about how Juniper got here, how long she's been with us, if we have her documents." "And what did you say?" "The truth, that you found her abandoned and brought her temporarily. But they were very clear, without proper documentation and without going through the official channels, we can't keep a child here." Teddy approached Juniper, who raised her eyes, red from crying. "Mr. Teddy, are they going to take me away?" "Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll sort this out." But even as he consoled Juniper, Teddy wondered how he could solve two such complex problems simultaneously. His company was being looted by his own partner, and now someone wanted to separate him from the only clue he had about Serenity's whereabouts. "Juniper," he said, crouching next to the girl, "do you remember anything else that your Mama Serenity said about the papers she found?" "She said she saw the same name in many different places, a man's name that she thought was strange because it appeared in companies that sold different things. Do you remember that name?" Juniper closed her eyes, concentrating with the intensity that only children can. "Earl." Mama Serenity always repeated that name when she got nervous. Teddy felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Earl. His partner for 15 years, the man he trusted to take care of the entire financial side of the company. "Juniper, are you sure about that name?" "I am. Mama Serenity said that Earl was on all the papers, but in a way that didn't make sense. She got really scared when she understood what that meant." Eleanor looked at her husband, realizing that something very serious was happening. "Teddy, this Earl, he's my partner," he replied, his voice coming out weaker than he intended. At that moment, the house phone rang. Eleanor answered and after a few seconds extended the phone to Teddy, with a worried expression. "It's for you. Says it's about Serenity." Teddy took the phone with trembling hands. "Hello? Mr. Theodore Blackwood?" The voice was male, deep, unknown. "Yes. I know you're with Serenity's daughter. If you want to see her alive again, stop asking questions and hand the child over to the authorities tomorrow. Some truths are too dangerous to come to light." The call was ended, leaving Teddy with the phone in his hand and his heart pounding unevenly. Someone was threatening Serenity, and now was also threatening him and Juniper. The threatening phone call left the house plunged into a heavy silence. Teddy looked at Juniper, who was watching him with her big, intelligent eyes, clearly realizing that something serious was happening. Eleanor held her husband's arm, her face pale with worry. "Teddy, we need to call the police," Eleanor whispered. "No," he replied, lowering his voice so Juniper wouldn't hear. "If we call the police now, Juniper will go straight into the social services system, and if there really is some danger to Serenity—" At that moment, Juniper got up from the sofa and approached them. "Mr. Teddy, Mama Serenity taught me a song. She said that if she ever vanished, I should sing that song for good people, people who wanted to help." "What song, sweetheart?" Juniper began to sing softly, an apparently childish song about little birds and numbers. But as she sang, Teddy realized it wasn't an ordinary song. The numbers mentioned in the lyrics were specific sequences, organized in a way that suggested codes or passwords. "Juniper, did your mama teach you anything else besides that song?" "She taught me where she kept important things. In the backyard of the house where she grew up, under the apple tree that her father planted." Teddy felt a spark of hope. "Do you know where that house is?" "I do. Mama Serenity took me there once, secretly. It's near the old church on a small street." Eleanor looked at her husband with an expression of alarm. "Teddy, you're not thinking of—" "I'm thinking exactly that. If Serenity hid evidence somewhere, I can use that evidence to negotiate with whoever is behind this. What if it's a trap? What if it's our only chance to save Serenity and protect Juniper?" At 3 in the afternoon, Teddy and Juniper were in the backyard of Serenity's old house. The building had been abandoned for years, with the roof partially collapsed and weeds taking over the land. But the apple tree was still there, large and leafy. "It's here," Juniper said, pointing to the base of the tree. Teddy began to dig, with a small shovel he had brought. After a few minutes, he felt something solid. It was a rusty cookie tin, buried recently. Inside the tin, he found documents carefully folded and protected in plastic bags. There was also a handwritten letter with the shaky handwriting of someone with little formal education. "To whoever finds this," the letter read, "my name is Serenity Santos. If something happens to me, it's because I discovered too much bad stuff about the man who works with numbers at the nut company. He's stealing a lot of money and threatened to hurt me if I told anyone. The papers here prove everything he did. I ask that you take care of my girl Juniper. She's everything I have in the world." Teddy examined the documents. They were copies of fraudulent contracts, records of shell companies, bank statements, and detailed notes on the irregularities Serenity had discovered. Everything pointed directly to Earl. But there was something else in the tin. A small cassette tape recording. "Juniper, do you know what this is?" Mama Serenity recorded conversations. She figured out how to turn on an old recorder and hid it in the office. With trembling hands, Teddy placed the tape in a portable recorder he had brought. The quality was poor, but it was possible to clearly hear Earl's voice on the phone, discussing details about transfers of money to offshore accounts and about how to keep the frauds hidden. Even more shocking, there was a conversation where Earl mentioned Serenity by name, saying that she knew too much and needed to disappear before she caused problems. Teddy felt nauseous. His partner for 15 years was not only stealing from his company, but had also directly threatened Serenity. At that moment, his phone rang. It was Earl. "Teddy, where are you? I have important news about those companies. You asked about this morning?" "What kind of news?" Teddy asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I found out they were created by mistake in the system. A typo that generated automatic payments. I'm already arranging for everything to be refunded." Teddy almost laughed at the audacity of the lie. "That's great, Earl. See you tomorrow." "Actually, I was thinking of stopping by your house tonight to better explain the situation and reassure you." A chill ran down Teddy's spine. Earl wanted to come to his house, where Juniper was, the only living witness to Serenity's discoveries. "No need, Earl. We'll talk at the company tomorrow." "I insist, Teddy. It's better if we resolve this." "And today—" Teddy hung up the phone with his heart racing. Earl was clearly nervous and desperate. The situation was becoming dangerous. "Mr. Teddy," Juniper said, tugging on his shirt, "Mama Serenity told me where she's hiding." "What do you mean?" "In the song I sang for you, the numbers aren't just numbers. They're an address, 15th Street, number 42. Teddy looked at the girl with admiration and amazement. Serenity had coded her location in a children's song and taught her daughter to decipher it. 15th Street, number 42, was in a remote area of the city known for its small farms and ranches. "Juniper, let's go get your mama." They drove to the address indicated by the song. It was a small ranch with a simple house surrounded by dense vegetation. Teddy parked at a safe distance and observed. There were signs of life in the house, clothes hanging on the clothesline, a bicycle leaning against the wall, smoke coming out of the chimney. "Mama's there," Juniper said certainly. "I recognize the pink blouse on the clothesline." Teddy carefully approached the house. Through a partially open window, he could see Serenity sitting in a chair, clearly injured but alive. There was a man he didn't recognize talking to her in a threatening tone. He quickly returned to the car. Now he knew where Serenity was, had evidence of Earl's frauds, and understood the whole situation. But he still needed to find a way to resolve everything without putting anyone at risk. That's when he had an idea. He called Earl. "I've changed my mind. You can come to my house at 8 o'clock, but bring all the documents from the companies you mentioned. I want to understand exactly what happened." "Of course, Teddy. I'll bring everything." Then he called a lawyer friend and explained the situation. He asked him to contact the authorities and organize a coordinated operation for 8 o'clock. At 7:30 at night, plainclothes police officers were already positioned around Teddy's house. The plan was simple. When Earl arrived and confirmed his participation in the frauds in the face of the evidence, he would be arrested. Simultaneously, the team would rescue Serenity at the ranch. At 8 o'clock sharp, Earl rang the doorbell. He was carrying a briefcase with documents, clearly nervous. "Teddy, I brought everything here. Let's sort this mess out." They sat down in the living room. Juniper had been taken to the bedroom by Eleanor, but the house's sound system was on, recording the entire conversation. "Earl, before we look at the documents, I need to ask you, do you know a woman named Serenity Santos?" Earl paled. "No, I don't know her." "Are you sure? She worked as a cleaner at our company." "Teddy, what's going on? Why are you asking these questions?" Teddy placed the cassette tape on the table. "Because Serenity recorded your phone conversations about the frauds, and because she's been missing for 3 days. Earl looked at the tape and then at Teddy, his face completely crumbling. "Teddy, you don't understand. I needed the money. I have debts, problems you can't imagine. I never wanted to hurt anyone." "Where is Serenity?" "She's safe. I swear she's safe. We just wanted her to forget what she saw." At that moment, the police entered the house. Earl was arrested red-handed, and simultaneously, the operation at the ranch rescued Serenity. 2 hours later, mother and daughter were reunited at the hospital where Serenity was being examined. Juniper ran into her mother's arms, and both cried with relief and happiness. "Mama, I sang the song like you taught me," Juniper said. "My smart girl," Serenity replied, kissing her daughter. Teddy watched the scene with emotion. In the last 3 days, he'd discovered a side of himself he didn't know, the ability to genuinely care about other people, to protect those who needed protection. 2 weeks later, Serenity was recovered, and Earl had fully confessed to the crimes, returning the stolen money. Teddy restructured the company in a more transparent way and offered Serenity a decent job. More importantly, he and Eleanor became Juniper's godparents, establishing a family relationship that enriched their lives in an unexpected way. The girl he found scavenging through trash had changed not only her own destiny, but also that of everyone around her. Her extraordinary memory saved her mother, unmasked a criminal, and taught a 58-year-old man that there was still much love to give and receive in the world.